Hello everyone. Today I will be bringing you a course on the jungler. I hope all of you can become the next generation of jungle kings as soon as possible. First, I would like to talk to you about the definition and role of the jungler. As the name suggests, the jungler is a non-laning role in esports games, commonly found in various MOBA titles. The jungler obtains resources by killing jungle creeps and supports teammates in the lanes. The role requires the summoner skill Smite and the purchase of a hunting knife. Through farming, ganking, counter-jungling, controlling objectives, team fights, and other methods, the jungler increases the team's overall resources. In summary, it is about obtaining extra gold and, on top of that, ganking. However, unlike traditional MOBA games, the jungler in Honor of Kings carries far more weight within a team composition. This is because HoK has relatively high jungle economy. There are a total of 8 jungle camps. The red side has 4 camps, from Boar and Firebeak to Monkey and Red Buff, followed by 4 camps on the blue side, Lizard, Cheetah, Blue Buff, and Spiketail, among others. With 8 jungle camps in total, the overall amount of jungle economy is greater than that of traditional MOBA games. In addition, the smaller map, combined with the faster movement speed in Honor of Kings, makes the game pace more compact. The lack of fog of war also increases the difficulty of ganking, making it difficult to rely solely on surprise attacks. At the same time, faster wave clearing increases the importance of mid-lane priority, allowing the jungler to appear more frequently around the map. All of these factors allow the jungler, through its high economy and high returns, to transition from a traditional gank-oriented tempo role into an economy-oriented role. The essence of Honor of Kings is also an economy game. By taking resources away from the enemy and suppressing their economy, your team can obtain more resources. Under these circumstances, the jungler itself fits the main tempo of the game. Therefore, there is no doubt that the jungler is a core role. In both competitive matches and high-rank games, whether it is the traditional carry jungler or tank jungler, the early and mid-game rely on high economy to drive the tempo. This includes frequently taking lane resources as well as obtaining jungle and lane economy in order to increase your own economy and fulfill the core role of the jungler in the early game. Carry junglers place more emphasis on high mobility and map movement, combined with securing kills, while tank junglers place more emphasis on invading and river skirmishes. Now that we have covered the definition of the jungler, let us move on to how to play the jungler. As we all know, since the jungler is so important, how does a qualified jungle king develop? We can break it down into 5 steps. The first step is job and power spikes. The second step is team composition analysis and early game setup. The third step, which is the main focus of today's lesson, is jungle creeping plan and economy acquisition. The fourth step is lane pushing and flanking. The fifth step is dragon fight deployment and decision making. The first 2 steps can be considered the fundamentals. The third step is the main focus of today's lesson, while the fourth and fifth steps will cover the more advanced aspects. So, let's start with the first step. Step 1. Job and power spikes. First, when playing the jungler, we need to understand when the hero we are playing reaches their power spike. In the early game, should we avoid fights and focus on farming, or should we invade and contest? For example, heroes such as Nakoruru and Menki require a certain amount of items and levels to support them in the early game. Their priority should be farming, while avoiding unnecessary fights as much as possible. Conversely, when the enemy is playing these heroes, we can choose to invade their jungle, disrupt their development, compress their farming space, and gain an early advantage. On the other hand, when playing more aggressive heroes, such as Ata and Ukyo Tachibana, which have high early game damage and short cooldowns, We can make use of their high early game damage and skill mechanics to organize more skirmishes in the lanes and jungle. We can take advantage of their early game strength to gain a greater economic advantage. For example, many heroes undergo a significant power spike at certain points. Jing, for instance, becomes much stronger at level 4 when she obtains her ultimate or after completing her first core item. Agudo is another example. These heroes can undergo a qualitative change at level 4 or after obtaining a certain amount of item. We can also use the characteristics of our hero during the hero selection phase to clearly determine the role that our selected hero should play in this particular game. Is it a pure cleanup-oriented assassin, or should we look for opportunities to deal damage before the main engagement, which decides our jobs for this game? For example, as we mentioned earlier, Jing is an assassin, while Agudo can deal pre-damage before engage. Another possibility is a hero whose primary responsibility is to dive the enemy's carry while also taking on part of the responsibility for initiating fights. Through these considerations, we analyze what role our hero should play in this particular game, when we can exert our strengths, and how we can maximize our strengths while avoiding our weaknesses. That is the first step we need to take. Okay, now that we have finished the first step, let's move on to the second part, which is team composition analysis and early game setup. After analyzing our own hero, we also need to remember that Honor of Kings is a 5-5 game. We cannot ignore the heroes on our own team or those on the enemy team. We need to analyze the strength and lane priority of each of our lanes, the mid lane's first rotation, and the first wave resource situation on both side lanes. We also need to determine whether roamer should focus on the lane matchup or control the river. Based on this, we can determine whether we can invade the enemy jungle in the early game, whether we need to defend our own jungle, whether we need to help one side secure resources, or whether we should coordinate a mid-side play to help mid lane obtain lane priority and take more lane economy. We also need to direct our teammates to coordinate with our opening routes. When facing a strong enemy composition, or when there is a possibility that our jungle will be invaded, we can ask our teammates to help watch our jungle. We also need to determine whether the support should come to mid lane or start side lane to obtain lane priority. For example, in the early game, if we are facing strong heroes such as Pei or strong heroes such as Biron and Dharma, and the enemy may also have a hero such as Jing or Ogran, there may be significant pressure on the jungle in the early game. In this case, we need to organize a jungle defense. If we are playing a composition such as Ukyo Tachibana and Xiao Qiao, we need to determine whether we can invade the enemy jungle in the early game. This is something we need to consider. In this regard, we need to accumulate our understanding of team compositions and our ability to read the game. We need to determine what kind of setup our composition should choose in a particular game, deepen our understanding of composition analysis, and understand what kind of setup we should use to obtain greater jungle advantages in the early game based on the composition and hero characteristics. Likewise, when playing weaker heroes, we should avoid being invaded by the enemy as much as possible. This is what we mean by the second step. Okay, now let's move on to our third step, which is the most important part of today's lesson: jungle creeping plan and economy acquisition. Here, I would like to introduce the concept of jungle respawn timers. First, buffs have a respawn time of 90 seconds. The respawn time for small jungle monsters, that is all allied and enemy jungle monsters other than buffs, is 70 seconds. The Space Spirity in the Clash Lane area has a respawn time of 60 seconds. We need to remember these three timings. This is because your opening jungle route determines the direction of your subsequent jungle respawns. For example, if you start at blue buff and clear your jungle normally, your second blue buff will appear at approximately 210. If you finish your first blue buff at around 40 seconds, then add the 90-second respawn timer. This is how we calculate jungle respawns. The same method can be applied when you invade the enemy jungle in the mid-game. After finishing a buff at 90 seconds. After finishing a small jungle monster at 70 seconds. For example, for the first small jungle monster in the blue side jungle, you will probably finish blue buff first and then clear that small camp, finishing at around 48 seconds. Adding the 70-second respawn time means it will respawn at approximately 158. As for red buff, after finishing the blue side jungle, you rotate to the red side. You will probably finish the first red buff at around 110. Then, adding another 90 seconds, the next red buff will appear at approximately 240. Another example is starting with boar, which we commonly call a boar start. You will finish the first rotation at around 35 seconds, and the second rotation will respawn at approximately 145, based on 35 plus 70 seconds. All jungle offense, defense, and ganking are based on these timings. Because your opening jungle route determines the subsequent jungle respawn timings, all of your later jungle routes have a clear pattern. In most situations, when a particular jungle area respawns, your jungler will most likely have arrived in that area to clear those monsters, and then determine the direction of their next rotation based on the jungle respawn routes. Because a jungle camp provides both economic and experience value, it is essentially inevitable that when your jungle is respawning, if you ignore it and rotate toward the opposite side of the map, you may risk losing an entire side of your jungle. The exceptions are when the enemy does not have enough time to invade your jungle, when the value gained from your gank is clearly greater than the resources lost from the jungle, or when your own jungle has already become extremely difficult to defend and you are forced to trade resources. These situations can create a different tempo. Of course, in the KPL and some high-ranked games, there are also situations where players deliberately change the tempo. You can give up the respawn of certain small jungle monsters and create an unexpected play. By changing your tempo, you can obtain additional benefits. In this situation, it is also reasonable to use mind games to set traps for the enemy. However, in most cases, the direction of jungle respawns and your jungle route are relatively fixed. We can also use this to determine the enemy jungler's position. It is almost like having a global view of the game. When playing your own jungler and trying to determine both your own and the enemy jungler's positions, you can compare the opening jungle routes of both sides. For example, if the enemy starts at red buff and you also choose a red buff start, you will most likely clear the jungle in the same direction and eventually encounter each other on the same side lane. If you and the enemy choose different buff starting routes, your jungle paths will diverge during the early game, allowing you to avoid each other. By determining the enemy jungler's position, we can also plan how to approach the enemy jungle, whether that means preparing an invasion in advance or taking some of the enemy's small jungle creeps. If the enemy jungler has a slower clear speed, we can plan around their buffs and small jungle creeps accordingly. If the enemy jungler rotates in the opposite direction to gank when their jungle is respawning, we can invade their jungle. In this way, although the enemy may gain an uncertain return from their gank, the jungle economy they lose is a very real loss. Now, let's talk about economy acquisition. The jungler has additional economic benefits because of the passive effect of the hunting knife. Before 4 minutes, when you take lane economy, you can obtain additional income without reducing the amount of economy gained by the laner. For example, a wave of minions may be worth 200 gold. Through the hunting knife, you can gain an additional 20% or 50%, meaning you can obtain nearly another 100 gold, while the laner does not lose any gold. This is the original intention behind the passive effect of the hunting knife. It was designed to allow junglers to help their laners more frequently without taking away their economy, while also obtaining additional gold themselves. This allows junglers to appear frequently in the lanes during the early game. This is also likely why the game designers want the jungler to help push waves while clearing the jungle, allowing the jungler to obtain some additional lane economy at the same time. Therefore, when the jungler finishes clearing one side of the jungle, if they are close to mid lane, they can share a wave of mid lane economy while helping secure lane priority. Alternatively, they can rotate toward the clash lane or farm lane and take a wave of lane economy. Then, by making use of their teleportation and high mobility, they can rotate back toward mid lane and take another wave. If there are resources spawning along this route, such as the Space Spirited or Spike Tail, they can also help secure these lane side resources. Therefore, the jungler's early game rotation determines which lane they can help secure resources for, which lane they can help establish an advantage in, and which lane they can temporarily share economy with, before eventually returning to mid lane to contest and obtain mid lane economy. For a jungler, the additional economy and experience gained from 2 waves of minions can almost equal that of 2 to 3 jungle camps. This clearly demonstrates the importance of lane economy. In the history of KPL, the 3-person wave sharing strategy emerged more than a year ago, partly due to changes to the passive effects of the hunting knife and knowledge gem. By using the passive effect of knowledge gem to offset the passive effect of the hunting knife, the jungler and laner can split the economy, while the support gains additional economy, thereby maximizing the team's overall economic output. At the same time, the jungler is a core role in the early game. When the jungler simultaneously takes both lane economy and jungle economy, they will inevitably become the highest level and highest economy role throughout the early and mid game. There is no other role that compares. The underlying principle of a mobile game is to make the player who is already ahead as strong as possible, using the strong to help the weak, and then allowing that player to drive the overall progression of the game. This is why we have the support come over to share the lane as well, which is what we commonly refer to as 3-person wave sharing. It allows the jungler to obtain higher economy in the early game and have a greater impact. This is especially important for heroes that rely heavily on levels and item. For example, Yang Jian, who can reach level 8 at 4 minutes, Ogran, who has a significant level advantage in the early game, and Agudo, who can obtain her ultimate early and benefit from having a higher level. These are all heroes that need to use their level and equipment advantages to establish an advantage. By the mid game, while clearing the jungle, the jungler needs to look for a side lane to manage. Taking advantage of their high mobility, they should prioritize pushing out the side lane and supplement their own lane economy. In this situation, we are talking about the traditional carry jungler. Of course, if you are playing a fighter or tank jungler in the mid game, or if you need to invade the enemy jungle, you need to first understand the enemy's jungle flow, which means understanding their jungle route and determining which buff is most likely to be respawning at this point. Then, you can determine the enemy jungler's position and decide whether you should invade their buff. You also need to consider whether you can use the advantage created by pushing out a side lane, which is the advantage of lane pushing and joining team fights that we will discuss later, to organize an invasion into the enemy jungle. By the mid game, the jungler also needs to obtain economy while leading certain offensive tempos and organizing invasions into the enemy jungle. Because by the mid game, if both sides are simply pushing lanes, their economies will remain relatively even. Only by entering the enemy jungle, obtaining their jungle resources, and continuously taking away their economy can you keep expanding your own advantage. Mid lane, contests, and team fights may be more common in lower-ranked games and more casual, solo queue-oriented playstyles. At higher ranks, however, you still need to invade the jungle to continuously expand your economy and convert your advantage into a winning position. This is how the jungler should play in the mid-game, and it is also the main focus of today's lesson. As you can see, the concept of jungle creeping plan, which is what we commonly refer to as the direction of jungle response, will become increasingly important in future games. Whether in the current KPL or HoK competitions, this is a very common and extremely important concept. Originally, we might only have expected junglers to memorize and understand this concept, but it will gradually extend to every role. For example, if you are a side laner, how do you defend against ganks? You need to know the position of the enemy jungler. Similarly, how do mid laners and supports coordinate with the jungler's ganks to gain an economic advantage, or avoid the enemy jungler and attack the opposite side of the jungle or the other half of the map? Don't you also need to understand the enemy jungler's route and know your own jungler's route? Only then can you coordinate better with your teammates, increase the success rate of lane ganks, maintain a numbers advantage, and increase your team's chances of winning team fights. Now let's move on to the fourth part, which is lane pushing and flanking. As we just mentioned, by the mid-game, the jungler needs to look for a side lane and prioritize pushing it out while supplementing their own lane economy. After pushing out the lane, the enemy will need to clear the disadvantaged wave. In this situation, we can create a numbers advantage and initiate a team fight. The jungler, especially a carry jungler or fighter, is generally a highly mobile role in the mid-game. With multiple dashes, high base movement speed, and additional movement speed from equipment, the jungler can rotate around the map quickly. They can prioritize dealing with a wave and then create a numbers advantage team fight. Whether it is an offensive or defensive jungle fight, an objective fight, or a mid lane clash, a 5v4 situation always means a higher win rate and a greater chance of victory. The essence of lane pushing is also something everyone should understand. It is about using the minion wave to create pressure and force the enemy to have fewer players available, regardless of how many players are missing. The same principle applies to the jungle. You can take advantage of the gap in the enemy's jungle clearing and initiate a team fight, creating situations where you have more players fighting against fewer players. Then, in the mid-game, you can gain an advantage through team fights, the invasions we just mentioned, and economic suppression. This is how a jungler can change the progression of a game in the mid-game. It is not simply about building your own economy through farming and creating advantage through individual mechanics and skill. That is one aspect. A more conventional way to secure victory is to use a 5v4 numbers advantage and win these outnumbered fights, allowing the entire team to gain an advantage much more easily. This is what we mean by flanking and surrounding the enemy. After pushing out a side lane, how do you initiate a numbers advantage team fight? If an enemy player goes to another lane to clear a wave, whether they go mid or to a side lane, as long as someone leaves to clear another wave, whether it is a disadvantaged wave or the enemy is trying to establish pressure on an advantageous lane, you can choose a flanking position even if you are not the one who pushed out the wave. This is especially important when you are behind or when your team is stuck in an even game and cannot find a way to break the deadlock. When the jungler cannot enter from the front effectively, they can flank from behind. For example, after pushing out a lane, you can enter the enemy jungle after determining that no one is there because the enemy is pushing forward, or because the enemy is currently in mid lane and the positions of their other players have already been revealed. You can then move through the jungle to bypass their vision, find a position with relatively few enemies or even no enemies, and wait there. When the enemy crosses the river, you can attack them. At the same time, if another enemy player reveals their position in the side lane, you can organize an attack. This allows you to surround the enemy from multiple directions. Your teammates apply pressure from the front and initiate the fight, while you become the flanking player and surround the enemy from a different position, catching them off guard. This is the purpose of flanking and surrounding the enemy, and it is one of the main ways we use carry junglers and fighters to teamfight in the mid and late game. For an assassin, entering from the front is extremely difficult. They can usually only enter later to clean up the fight. But in many situations, if the team's initial damage and engagement are insufficient, it is also difficult for the assassin to secure those cleanup kills. In these situations, flanking and surrounding positions become necessary. We need to find this kind of position. This is also more advanced content, and I will provide some additional explanation later. Next is the fifth step: Dragon teamfight deployment and decision making. When watching professional matches and high-ranked games, it is easy to see how a dragon fight at 4 or 10 minutes can immediately change the state of the game. Two teams that originally appear to be evenly matched can see the entire situation change immediately depending on the outcome of the dragon fight. Next, let's talk about the importance of dragons. The Tyrant buff provides a higher damage increase. Within the first 4 minutes, it can be equivalent to roughly one small item for every player, providing around 800-900 worth of bonus damage, or approximately the damage of 2 or 3 iron swords. If it is a Shadow Tyrant, it means higher mobility and greater damage output in subsequent fights, making it easier to win team fights. The Overlord buff, on the other hand, provides Vanguard. The economy provided by Vanguard is fixed, which allows us to reduce the enemy's economic income. Unlike normal lane minions, whose economic value gradually increases from around 180 gold at the beginning to 200 gold later, and eventually more than 200, the economic value of Vanguard remains fixed at 180. This reduces the amount of lane economy available to the enemy, affecting both their access to and source of lane income. At the same time, when Vanguard eliminates enemy minions, the economy from those minions can be evenly distributed among the 5 allied heroes across the 3 lanes. This is different from normal minion waves, where if 2 waves are fighting each other without any heroes nearby, part of the lane economy will be lost. Vanguard do not work this way. After eliminating the minion wave, they allow the 5 allied heroes to share the economy from those minions. This allows the team to group up more effectively and change the tempo. In addition, the Shadow Vanguard can gain access to the Shadow Pass, providing a certain amount of damage reduction while on the Shadow Pass. Alternatively, you can use the Vanguard to clear one lane's wave, delay the enemy's offensive tempo, or exchange tempo. As junglers, before a dragon fight, we need to understand 3 things. First, we need to choose our pre-fight setup and determine which side lane to manage. We need to create a numbers advantage as early as possible, whether it is the far side lane away from the dragon or the near side lane closer to the dragon. We also need to secure more vision and account for the possibility of rushing the dragon. Second, we need to understand the battleground around the dragon fight. Are we going to use the dragon to force the enemy into a fight, or are we primarily going to rush the dragon? Is there a possibility that the enemy will come over and contest the smite? If so, can we win the smite contest? We also need to determine which terrain gives us the greater advantage. Is it better to control the L bush or the conventional mid lane bush? Finally, we need to understand our jungler's killing threshold and make sure we use smite at the appropriate HP threshold when securing the dragon. For example, with Ukiyo Tachibana's second skill combined with smite, the killing threshold may be around 4000 HP. If we are playing Jing with 2 smites and a high killing threshold, How do we control the dragon's HP to the optimal level and make sure we can win the smite contest? This is especially important when the enemy has high burst heroes such as Gan and Mo or Angela. We need to make sure that our execute skill combined with smite can reliably secure the buff. In many Tempest Dragon fights, the jungler needs to contest the dragon based on their smite timing and HP threshold. In these situations, accurately calculating the objective's HP and understanding the execute threshold are also extremely important. Next, let's introduce some of the junglers in the current version and give you some recommendations for climbing the ranked ladder. Okay, first is Pei. This jungler has been a strong hero since his release. Whether in competitive matches or ranked games, we can describe his role as an all-around tempo-oriented jungler with extremely high map mobility. He is highly mobile and works well with fighter or tank side lane heroes, as well as tank heroes who are good at engaging. Through his high mobility, he can gather information about the enemy, kite and pressure them, and build economic and tempo advantages. Because of the strong poke from his human form, the dual resistance and attack bonuses in tiger form, as well as his ability to poke and dive onto carries, his durability is better than that of traditional assassins, making Pei's playstyle highly versatile. He does not rely on reaching level 4 to unlock an ultimate, with 2 forms and multiple skills available from the beginning. He is quite strong in the early game, and his opening tempo can vary significantly. He can choose a red buff start into a side lane gank, a conventional jungle invasion, a normal side lane opening, or even a mid lane opening. He can also give up some of his small jungle camps and leave the jungle area early to gank. As we mentioned earlier regarding jungle routes, when the enemy has Pei, you need to pay more attention to whether he may use an unconventional tempo to gank you. You cannot simply rely on conventional jungle routes and jungle information to determine his position, because Pei is a relatively unique hero. In terms of mechanics, make more use of the enhanced basic attack from his first attack in human form to poke. Make use of tiger form for jungle clearing and map movement, and pay attention to your energy when entering a fight. When diving onto a carry, you cannot miss the second skill in tiger form. In tiger form, successfully attacking your target is what allows you to recover energy. In human form, the first skill also consumes energy. We can use the first skill to check bushes, but avoid casting it unnecessarily. Use basic attacks to accumulate energy recovery, and make sure you always have enough energy to dive onto the enemy carry during team fights. He is particularly effective against farming-oriented carry junglers, such as Nejha and Agudo, as well as relatively low-tolerance heroes such as Jing. In many situations, as long as Jing does not have an overwhelming economic advantage, Pei can easily switch into tiger form and jump away, causing Jing's entire skill combo to miss. He is also effective against tanks with slow map movement and jungle clear speeds. Because Pei himself has high mobility and a fast jungle clear, he can use his jungle clear speed and efficiency to accomplish more around the map. For example, tanks such as Dun, Flowborn Tank, and Kaiser, which have relatively slow jungle clear speeds, are at a disadvantage when facing Pei. Pei can maintain a clear advantage over these heroes in both tempo and farming efficiency. If you have good game awareness, I recommend trying Pei. Next, we have Zilong, currently the most frequently picked jungler in the KPL, and also a highly versatile fighter with a very high pick rate in ranked games. Like Yang Jian, he combines mobility, damage, crowd control, and sustain. His first skill and ultimate provide 2 dashes that give him strong map mobility. His passive damage reduction gives him a durable body, while his second skill provides healing, and his first skill allows him to refresh his mobility. All of these factors give Zilong extremely high tolerance for mistakes. Compared with both traditional assassins and fighters, he also has excellent damage output and map mobility. In the current version, there are almost no heroes that directly counter Zilong. On the contrary, when facing certain assassins, Zilong can use his fighter durability and skill mechanics to survive the enemy assassin's full combo and then counterattack, creating a form of reverse counter. At the same time, Zilong can change his role through different item builds, allowing him to perform different functions within different team compositions and team fights. When we watch the KPL 1-1 from Wolves, once chose a tanky build consisting of Dragon's Rage, Frigid Charge, and Succubus Cloak, turning Zilong into a fighter with genuine tank properties. In team fights, he was able to repeatedly enter and exit the fight. Of course, the conventional Axe of Torment plus Dragon's Rage build is also viable. It depends on what role you need to play in your composition and what responsibilities you need to take on. This is what we mean by analyzing your hero's characteristics and the team composition, and then determining the role and attributes you need in the current game. Zilong is a perfect hero for this situation. Through different item builds, he can perform different roles, which ultimately determines his job in the team fight. If the enemy has a high burst composition, you can safely choose a tankier build and counter the enemy's composition from the other direction. Combined with his high base damage and excellent skill mechanics, this makes Zilong one of the strongest junglers in the current jungle ecosystem. In almost any situation, he is a reliable choice for climbing the ranked ladder. Next, let's talk about another strong jungler, Jing, who represents the type of hero that heavily rewards mechanical skill. When the hero was first released, her base numbers were relatively low. After several buffs brought her numbers up to a more standard level, she essentially became a benchmark for mechanical skill. Her dash, combo technique, and swap mechanics give her an extremely high skill ceiling, along with excellent mobility, carry diving, map movement, and jungle clear speed. She can easily accumulate a very high economy. In team fights, her multiple dashes and extremely long-range diving give her an enormous threat against enemy carries. She has always been one of the representative heroes for mechanical skill and execution, and her performance heavily depends on individual mechanics and entry timing. There have been many iconic KPL moments, such as AG Zhongyi using a tank Jing to repeatedly enter and exit team fights, and top Esports Xuan using a full damage Jing to eliminate Cat Boom through image swaps. Although Jing is classified as an assassin, her unique skill mechanics, healing, multiple dashes, clone-based entry mechanics, and the option to build tank items give her a higher margin for error and a more durable body compared with traditional assassins such as Nakoruru. Therefore, I believe Jing represents the upper tier of assassin strength. She is an assassin, but at the same time, she has extremely high damage, excellent farming ability, extremely high mobility, and fast map movement, while also having a certain degree of tolerance for mistakes. This means that Jing is what we commonly call an OP hero. In terms of mechanics, being proficient with dash combo and her swap mechanics is only the foundation. What is more important is your farming efficiency and your judgment of when to enter a fight. You also need to be highly proficient with swapping between the hero and the image through the ultimate. You cannot miss the immobilization effect because it is extremely important. Missing the immobilization can easily cause you to fail to deal your full subsequent damage, while also giving the enemy carry room to use flash or other mobility skills to escape. In theory, Jing counters almost all fragile heroes. For example, relatively squishy assassins and carries such as marksmen and mages that lack strong counter-engagement tools are all vulnerable to Jing. However, she is also countered by certain heroes, such as Flowborn Tank and Pei. These counters are relative, because the key factor is still farming speed and the environment for diving carries during team fights. For a Jing player with strong mechanics, as long as she has enough economy and there is someone she can dive onto during a team fight, Jing is essentially unstoppable. This is also why so many streamers and specialist players are so confident when playing Jing. The hero has an extremely high skill ceiling. As long as you have the mechanics and can farm enough economy, if the enemy does not interfere with your development, the impact you can have in team fights will be extremely significant. I recommend Jing to players who have strong mechanics and are confident in their individual execution. This hero can provide an extremely satisfying visual and mechanical experience. Next, we have another strong jungler, Agudo, a hero that we often see in fast push strategies or 5-stack games. Her role is essentially that of a tempo-oriented carry jungler. There may be some controversy around putting this hero here because Agudo is not particularly popular among most players. In reality, however, the hero's overall strength and role within the jungle ecosystem are both excellent. First, Agudo has excellent map mobility and damage output. Her attack range is relatively strong compared with that of ordinary junglers. In many situations, Agudo can function as a secondary marksman. She can take on a marksman-like role during the early stages of many teamfights, constantly poking and weakening the enemy's state. Because of this characteristic, she can counter some of the popular tank junglers in the current version. Apart from Kaiser, heroes such as Dun, Ogran, and Flowborn Tank have relatively short attack ranges and can therefore be countered by Agudo. Agudo can repeatedly poke them and gradually wear down their HP. She can also effectively deal with some popular single-target heroes such as Haya, Kui, and Mozi. These heroes are strong when focusing on a single target. But because Agudo has her small jungle monsters, her vision-checking mechanics, and the invulnerability effect of her ultimate, these heroes perform poorly when facing Agudo. They will constantly be kited by Agudo, or their skills will be blocked by Agudo's monsters. Agudo occupies a relatively high position within the overall jungle ecosystem. She can counter many heroes, although she is also countered by certain heroes. For example, Neta can stick directly to Agudo, while Guan Yu can restrict Agudo during teamfights and control her. Heroes such as Pei can also suppress Agudo's farming space in the early game. These types of heroes have relatively strong advantages against Agudo. Conversely, traditional understanding suggests that heroes such as Luna and Lamb are relatively strong counters to Agudo in carry jungler matchups. However, this is only true when they can get directly onto Agudo. If Agudo is paired with a strong frontline or strong pre-damage dealers, she will not give you the opportunity to get close to her, which can instead create a reverse counter. Of course, one reason Agudo does not have such a high pick rate is that, aside from her relatively unique skill mechanics, she also has a relatively high dependence on red buff and on maintaining her own tempo. You need to clearly understand your own tempo, when to gank, when to use your skills, when to rely on basic attacks to poke, and when to use your ultimate. All of this requires a certain level of proficiency. She relies heavily on red buff. Without red buff, when she is normally farming and has not yet obtained Sparkforge Dagger and Doomsday, she does not pose a particularly significant threat to frontline heroes. She needs to obtain red buff and the attribute bonuses provided by releasing jungle monsters. Then combine her ultimate with the stacking of her passive stun to continuously apply debuffs to enemy heroes and maximize her damage output. Although the on-hit system has been weakened in the current version and the attack speed reset mechanic of Furbo has been fixed, I still recommend the Sparkforge Dagger plus Doomsday build for now. If burst damage is high, you can choose Deep Frost Siege. Red buff is particularly important for Agudo in the mid-game. Without red buff, as I just mentioned, if she cannot deal meaningful damage to the front line, all of the matchup relationships will be reversed. Ideally, she should be paired with some strong front-facing damage dealers and frontline heroes. As we mentioned earlier, a mid laner with sufficient ability to provide front-loaded damage can help supplement her output, while side lane heroes such as Biron and supports such as Zhang Fei can help establish the front line and create space for her, giving her a better damage environment. Although Agudo has a certain degree of frontline capability, she is still essentially a squishy hero in most situations. She needs her teammates to create a suitable environment for her to deal damage. A fully developed Agudo can deal extremely significant damage in teamfights when she has a good damage environment, and the threat she poses to the enemy is also very high. As for some practical tips, unlike traditional junglers who may need to purchase the hunting knife, a completed item, or boots first, Agudo can purchase a relentless blade and immediately start building a completed item. She does not rely as heavily on boots for map movement because her second skill already provides an excellent mobility mechanic. Colliding with walls gives her additional speed. She is therefore not particularly dependent on boots in the early game, nor does she rely heavily on the attack bonus provided by the hunting knife. Instead, her early game is more dependent on Furball, her own abilities, and the triple damage effect provided by red buff, allowing her to deal mixed damage through multiple attacks and maintain high damage output against enemy heroes. Having both red and blue buffs together with a completed item is essentially her power spike. In terms of mechanics, make more use of the movement mechanics of her second skill when rotating around the map. During ganks, use the second skill to roll directly into the enemy and create a small control effect. Then use the knock-up and brief invulnerability from her ultimate to supplement your crowd control. She is relatively vulnerable to heroes with strong direct engagement capabilities, which pose a significant threat to her. That covers some of the popular and commonly recommended junglers in the current version. There is also the new hero Six-Eared Macaque, who currently has both a high win rate and a high number of wins. This hero may face some nerfs, so I have temporarily left her out of today's lesson. In addition, HoK has not yet released this hero, so I will hold off on recommending her for now. The main focus of today's lesson has been the direction of the jungle, with our jungle roots being the key focus, as well as our job and analysis within the team composition at the start of the game. As a jungler, we must make sure to build our economy as much as possible in the early game and complete the 5-step process to becoming a jungle king. That concludes everything I wanted to cover today. Let's review what we covered. Team composition analysis, jungle creeping plan and lane rotations, lane pushing, flanking and team fights, and dragon fights. As a jungler, remember that the essence of the jungler is economy acquisition, while the core of the jungler is the tempo created by your hero and the role itself. Thank you, everyone. I hope all of you can become the next generation of jungle kings in the future.